Hey everybody, this is Austin Kent, or AK31 at Sports.ws. I wanted to put together a new video to explain how to set your team's lineup, just to explain the basic principles to new users and also highlight a couple of new features for old users. Um, Basically, what you're looking at right here is a custom scoring format league where 15 players are allowed on your roster. So let's jump right into it, I guess. At Sports.ws, your mission as a coach is to fill 240 minutes, which isn't a magical number, it's just 48 times 5. So you want to fill 48 center minutes, 96 forward minutes, and 96 guard minutes. And how you do that is based on how you position your lineup. You can drag and drop players all over the place. The one thing to keep in mind is that the scoring cron that scores your lineup when actual games happen starts at the top of your lineup and it works its way down to the bottom. So it doesn't matter whether you put your centers at the top or your forwards or your guards. You don't even have to cluster them together. You just have to picture your lineup as a waterfall. And at the top, you start with 96 guard minutes available, 96 forward minutes available, and 48 center minutes. So in this particular example, you see early on how the minutes are sort of split. We obviously have 48 center minutes to use, and Drummond, who averages 34 minutes per game, is projected in this configuration to use 34 of those minutes, which leaves us with 14 more minutes to use. But Ivica Zubac plays more than 14 minutes per game. He plays 18 minutes. So the site is going to take the prorated amount of his actual fantasy points, and it's going to squeeze his fantasy points per minute into the minutes that are available, which is 14. So Zubac's FPPM, his fantasy points per minute, is 0.79. So what the scoring cron will automatically do is basically just take that prorated fantasy point amount and it will add it to your score. So this number here is the cumulative total of all the fantasy points that are actually going to count. Obviously, if you just go through their fantasy points per game averages, it'll be much higher than 182. However, we are only interested in the fantasy points that are actually going to count for us in this game. So Drummond, who averages a 0.94 FPPM, accounts for 31.5 fantasy points, and then Zubac adds another 10.8. Let's say if Zubac was much better than Drummond, we could put him above Drummond, and there we'll get the little notification that we've made a change. But in this situation, now Zubac, because he's higher up on the list, gets 100% of his 18 minutes are going to count. And it's Drummond whose minutes are prorated. So it's the same for centers, it's the same for forwards, and it's the same for guards. A good, tip is just to keep your players with the highest FPPMs up at the top. That'll at least get you halfway there to having your most competitive roster. But there's other things to think about as well, including dual eligibility. And here's an example of that right now. Let me just put Drummond back here. I've stacked my lineup in such a way that I've got Drummond here at center and then Zubac as sort of his backup. And then right below them, I've got Frank Kaminsky. And Kaminsky's a center forward. He could just as easily be a forward center, which comes with which means a different thing, which we'll get into. But right now, I have him as the center forward. So think of it this way: as the scoring cron goes through your lineup, it will look at Drummond, it'll use his 34 minutes, then it'll move on, and it will use part of Zubac's minutes. Then it'll get to Frank Kaminsky, who plays 16 minutes. And he's a center forward, so the site will try to apply those minutes to center first. However, there are no center minutes available, so his secondary position takes over, and the 16 minutes count towards forward position, as is the case here. Let's say Zubac wasn't in the picture, then all of a sudden Kaminsky would fill in the center minutes and the rest of his minutes would spill over into forward. Another way of looking at exactly that is this icon here. If I wanted to make sure that my lineup was, resilient enough to withstand an injury, I could simply mute Zubac here. Of course, if Zubac's going to be out for months, I might want to move him off my lineup altogether and replace him with another center. But if it's just a one-game absence, I don't really have to freak out, because I can see that if Zubac does play 0 minutes, Kaminsky's going to step up, and all of my forwards will then play slightly more as well. So I'm going to unmute Zubac here, and you're going to see the minutes go back to the way they were. Kaminsky's going to play the forward minutes, and then I'm going to start stacking the rest of my forwards. So at this stage, I'm using 100% of Randall's minutes, Hollis Jefferson's minutes, and I get all the way down to Beasley's minutes. And if you add up all of these, 16, 31, 21, 15, and 11, it'll equal 94 minutes. That's why Chris Middleton, who's a forward guard, will start up forward, and he'll exhaust those 2 minutes, and the rest of his production will count as a guard minute. So then we'll use the rest of his minutes here at guard, and then Beal plays a lot and Rondo plays a lot. So that's basically it. The thing to think about is make sure that you always have in mind that the scoring cron works from the top of your lineup down. And we've talked about how dual eligibility works here. If we wanted to instead put Frank Kaminsky as a forward center, all of a sudden he's not going to play those center minutes at all. So if Zubac does end up getting hurt, so we'll simulate that now by muting him, all of a sudden Kaminsky's not filling in those center minutes, because we've asked him basically to focus on forward minutes first. And then you get the big nasty red 14 here, which is suicide for fantasy teams. You never want to leave minutes on the table. That's a quick way to underperform. So we can unmute Zubac, and we can put Kaminsky back here as a center forward. The last thing I wanted to talk about was these red players. Any player that is below the 12th spot on your lineup will not count. Regardless of your league settings, only 12 players ever count towards your actual final score. But some leagues allow for rosters that are larger than 12 players, such as this league, which allows for 15 players. So in this situation, I've got Cameron Johnson, Naz Reid, and Loogie Dort, and even if they had amazing games, they wouldn't count towards my team because they're inactive players. None of these guys have stats for us to really use, as an example here. But let's say I wanted to put Dort up into my lineup. It would bump him into the top 12. He'd therefore be inactive. And the Woodslanger, Dennis Smith Jr., would thus be inactive. So the best way to really learn how to, optimize your lineup is to just play around with things. And we've got a lineup simulator for people who don't have accounts yet, or maybe those who are drafting, and thus this lineup page isn't available yet. But yeah, you just move your lineups around. You could put your guards at the top. You could put your centers at the top. You could put your biggest minute players up at the top. It doesn't matter. As long as you know that the scoring works from the top down, you should be good to go. The last thing that I wanted to say before I wrapped up this video was that some leagues, any league really, you're always, if you claim a player off of waivers, or maybe you've made a bunch of draft pick trades, and you can end up with more players than the max roster size for your league. One thing that you will see that we're not looking at right now, unfortunately, is if, let's say I had a 16th player, and this is a 15-player league, I'd see that player appear in my lineup, and but they wouldn't be white or gray. They wouldn't even be this nice, fancy light red. They'd be a very dark red, and it would say specifically that this player will be dropped automatically from your lineup at the next lineup freeze. So that's just the last thing to think about. That's a new a display thing that we never had before. The functionality is not new. Your lineup's always got trimmed back down to the max roster size at lineup deadlines, but this is just a visual way of showing that. So that's it. I'm going to wrap it up here. I could talk for hours about this. If you have any questions, you can contact me or any longtime users wherever you can on the site. My username is AK31. You can contact me on Twitter at Sports.ws or at Austin Kent. Really, but we've got a good community of people who really want to share how this format works because it's kind of a satisfying way to build lineups. And you'll notice that players that don't necessarily have value in other fantasy formats suddenly do because they might not play 35 minutes a night, but they play a productive 15 minutes. I'm a big fan of Jonah Bolden here. I know his FPPM is not great in this format, but he's one of the players that can come in and play reserve minutes, but actually does a decent job while he's there. So I hope you enjoy setting your lineup and tinkering with your lineup as much as I do. If you have any questions, just track us down. Okay, thank you.